Standing before the colossal pyramids of Giza, it's almost impossible not to be overwhelmed by their sheer scale and perfection. For thousands of years, these monumental structures have captured our collective imagination, a timeless testament to human ambition. But when we try to picture the army of laborers who actually built them, what do we see? For generations, a persistent image has been burned into our minds, a vast workforce of slaves, driven by the crack of a whip, subsisting on nothing more than meager scraps of bread and water. It's a dramatic picture, one that fits a certain narrative of ancient power, but what if that picture is completely wrong? What if the truth about the pyramid builders is far more fascinating and tells a much richer story about the society that could achieve such an impossible feat? Today, we're going on an investigative journey to uncover one of ancient Egypt's most delicious mysteries, the real diet of the pyramid builders. Forget everything you think you know about their rations. Through the incredible work of archaeologists and the analysis of ancient trash heaps, bakeries, and burial sites, a startling new reality has emerged. These workers were not starving slaves, they were skilled laborers, and they were fed remarkably well. Their daily meals were a powerful engine, fueling one of the most staggering construction projects in human history. We're talking about a menu that would surprise you with its variety and nutritional value, a diet that was carefully calculated to sustain immense physical effort day after day, year after year. So, what was actually on the menu for the men who moved mountains of stone? How did their food not only sustain their bodies, but also revealed the sophisticated organization of Old Kingdom Egypt? We are about to pull back the curtain on the kitchens that fed a nation of builders, exploring the breads, the beers, the meats, and the fish that powered this ancient wonder. This isn't just a story about food, it's a story about the people, the logistics, and the society that made the impossible possible. Get ready to completely rethink the lives of the pyramid builders, because the truth is far more compelling than the myth. To truly understand the meals that fueled this operation, we first need to meet the people who sat down to eat them. The popular image of a vast, anonymous mass of slaves is, according to decades of archaeological evidence, a profound misconception. These were not shackled laborers, but a highly organized, rotating workforce of skilled Egyptian villagers. Think of them as state-sponsored civil servants, conscripted for a period of national service. They were divided into crews, much like a modern construction company, and these crews even had proud, self-chosen names like the Friends of Khufu or the Drunkards of Menkaure, names discovered etched onto the very stones of the burial chambers they built. This wasn't the work of a broken, oppressed people, it was the work of a motivated, collective effort, a national project that unified the country. These workers didn't sleep in the sand next to the pyramids. They lived in a purpose-built, planned community, a workers' village located just south of the Giza Plateau. Today, the site is known as Height El Ghurab, which translates to the Wall of the Crow. This was essentially a bustling, ancient company town, complete with barracks, bakeries, breweries, and even administrative buildings. It's here, in the dusty remains of this settlement, that archaeologists have found the most compelling evidence that completely rewrites the story of their daily lives. By sifting through the ancient trash heaps, analyzing animal bones, and examining the chemical residues in pots and bowls, we can reconstruct a detailed picture of their diet. The food supply wasn't an afterthought. It was a critical part of the project's logistics, a calculated fuel for immense human effort. The very existence of this organized village, with its dedicated food production facilities, proves that the state invested heavily in the well-being of its workforce, understanding that a well-fed worker was a strong and productive one. So how do we know any of this? How can we possibly reconstruct a menu from over 4,000 years ago? The answer lies not in ancient recipe books, but in the literal garbage the workers left behind. Archaeologists have turned into culinary detectives, using sophisticated scientific methods to analyze the remnants of their daily lives. The most direct evidence comes from the ancient trash dumps, or middens, surrounding the workers' village. These piles of refuse are like time capsules, filled with the bones of butchered animals, fish scales, and the charred remains of grains. By carefully sifting through this ancient waste, researchers can perform a statistical analysis, counting and identifying the types of bones to determine not just what they were eating, but also the relative quantities. The findings are staggering. The animal bones aren't just from old, tough creatures. They include high-quality cuts of beef, sheep, and goat, suggesting these laborers had access to prime meat, likely from state-organized cattle ranches and hunting expeditions. This wasn't just occasional protein, it was a regular part of their diet. But the investigation goes even deeper, right into the mouths of the workers themselves. The skeletal remains found in the workers' cemetery have been subjected to detailed dental analysis. By studying the wear patterns on their teeth and even the microscopic food particles trapped in the calculus or hardened plaque, scientists can identify the types of plants and grit they were consuming. This dental evidence confirms a diet heavy in coarse grains, the kind you'd find in rough ground bread, which left distinctive scratches on the enamel. It also reveals traces of tubers and other vegetables that wouldn't have survived in the trash heaps. This gives us a personal, biological connection to these individuals, telling us not just what was on their plate, but what actually passed their lips. Perhaps the most revealing, if less glamorous, line of evidence comes from the study of coprolites, which is a scientific term for ancient, desiccated feces. Analyzing coprolites provides a direct snapshot of a single meal, showing exactly what was ingested and even how well it was digested. This can tell us about parasites' overall health and the complete composition of a meal, from meat fibers to fish bones to grain husks. Finally, there's the analysis of pottery residues. The cooks in the workers' village used large ceramic pots to stew meats, brew beer, and store supplies. Over time, fats and other organic molecules from the food seeped into the porous clay of these pots. Using a technique called gas chromatography mass spectrometry, scientists can identify the chemical fingerprints of these residues thousands of years later. They can distinguish between animal fats and fish oils, and even detect the presence of dairy products. This tells us not just what they ate, but how it was cooked, that a particular pot was used for slow-cooking beef stew, for example, or for fermenting grain into beer. Together, these methods form a powerful, multifaceted picture, moving us from speculation to a scientifically supported menu of the past. Now, with this detective work in mind, let's pull up a chair to the ancient table and see what was actually being served. And if there was one item that was the undisputed king of the menu, the true foundation of every single meal, it was bread. This wasn't just a side dish, it was the absolute core of their caloric intake, the carbohydrate-rich fuel that powered the lifting of multi-ton blocks. The grains of choice were primarily two hearty cereals, emmer wheat and barley. Emmer wheat, an ancient predecessor to modern wheat, was particularly prized. It was a resilient plant, well suited to the Egyptian climate, but it came with a significant challenge: its grains were tightly enclosed in a tough, inedible husk. This meant that turning emmer into flour was not a simple, quick process. It was a back-breaking, time-consuming labor in its own right. The first step in this daily grind, quite literally, was to separate these stubborn grains from their husk. Workers would moisten the whole emmer spikelets and then pound them vigorously with wooden pestles in large stone mortars. This initial threshing was just to break everything loose. Then came the real work, the actual milling. This was done using a simple but brutally effective tool called a saddle quern. Picture a large, slightly concave stone slab set on the ground. The worker, most often a woman, would kneel before it, taking a smaller, rounded handstone and grinding the pre-pounded grain back and forth across the surface. It was a motion that required immense shoulder strength and patience, a rhythmic rocking that could last for hours to produce just enough coarse flour for a single family or crew. This wasn't fine, white, modern flour. It was a gritty, whole grain meal filled with bits of the grain husk, sand from the grinding stones, and even fine stone dust worn off from the corn itself. This unintended mineral grit actually left its mark on the workers' teeth, causing significant wear that we can still see on their skeletons thousands of years later. Once you had this coarse, earthy flour, it was time to bake, but the bread of the pyramid builders didn't come out of a pan looking like a sandwich loaf. The most common baking method, evidenced by the countless fragments of ceramic molds found at Giza, involved using preheated conical clay pots. The bakers would fire these molds in a kiln until they were scorching hot, then quickly pour the wet, fermented dough inside. The heat would instantly create a crust on the outside while the inside steamed, resulting in a dense, hearty loaf that was easy to transport and lasted for days. When the bread was done, you break the mold to get the loaf out, giving it a unique, pointed shape. We know this process intimately because these very bread pots, often still containing the carbonized remains of the final loaf, have been found in incredible abundance at the site. The importance of this bread extended far beyond the workers' village. These same conical loaves have been discovered in the tombs of pharaohs and nobles, placed there as eternal sustenance for the afterlife. If bread was considered a vital offering for a god-king in the next world, you can be sure it was the essential fuel for the living men building his gateway to the stars. But bread was only half of the story. To truly understand the diet that built the pyramids, we have to turn our attention to its inseparable partner, a beverage that was so much more than just a drink. We're talking about beer. Now, it's crucial to wipe away any modern images you have of a crisp, golden lager. The beer of ancient Egypt was a completely different creation. It was thick, cloudy, and porridge-like, more of a liquid bread or a nutritious gruel that you would sometimes need to strain with a straw to drink. It was a staple in every sense of the word, consumed by everyone from the pharaoh to the peasant, and for the pyramid builders, it was an absolutely vital source of energy and hydration under the brutal desert sun. So how was this ancient superfuel made? The process was a beautiful, efficient piece of culinary alchemy that started with the very same grains used for bread. Brewers would take barley and lightly bake it into a rough, crumbly loaf, deliberately halting the baking process before the inside was fully cooked. This partial baking activated the enzymes in the grain, but left the starches accessible. These crumbly, malted barley loaves were then broken up and mixed with water in large vats, creating a sweet, sugary mash. To this mixture, they would sometimes add a starter of fermented dough from a previous batch, or they might use dates, whose wild yeast would kickstart the fermentation process. The entire concoction was left to sit for several days, bubbling away as natural yeast converted the sugars into alcohol. The final product was a thick, nutrient-dense beverage with a relatively low alcohol content, but a high concentration of vitamins, minerals, and calories. It was a complete food, providing energy from carbohydrates, B vitamins from the yeast, and a safe source of hydration, as the fermentation process killed off many harmful waterborne pathogens. This beer's nutritional profile is what made it a cornerstone of the laborer's diet. While the bread provided the long-burning carbohydrates, the beer offered a more quickly accessible form of energy, along with essential hydration. In the scorching heat, a worker could consume a substantial amount of liquid calories without feeling overly full, effectively refueling and rehydrating simultaneously. It was a practical solution to the immense physical demands of the job, but its importance extended far beyond the physiological. Beer was so central to the Egyptian economy and social structure that it functioned as a form of currency. Wages for state projects, including the construction of the pyramids, were often paid in rations of bread and beer. We have administrative records from other ancient Egyptian sites, ostraka and papyri, that detail the standard daily ration for a laborer, typically 10 loaves of bread and a third to a full jug of beer, depending on their rank and role. This wasn't a bonus, it was their salary. Imagine the logistical triumph this represents. To keep a workforce of thousands motivated and productive, the state had to manage a supply chain that could deliver these vast quantities of bread and beer every single day. The workers' village at Giza, with its industrial-scale bakeries and breweries operating side by side, was the engine room of this entire operation. The brewing and baking processes were deeply intertwined, often happening in the same facilities, using the same base ingredients to create the two pillars of the Egyptian diet. This system wasn't just about preventing hunger, it was about fostering a stable, compensated workforce. Receiving a regular, reliable ration of such nutritious and desirable staples would have created a sense of order and value, reinforcing that their back-breaking work was a recognized and rewarded service to the state. So when we picture a worker taking a break under the Egyptian sun, lifting a ceramic jug to his lips, he wasn't just enjoying a drink. He was consuming his wages, refueling his body, and participating in an economic system sophisticated enough to build wonders that would stand for millennia. Now, if bread and beer were the reliable, daily fuel, the real shocker from the archaeological evidence is what else was regularly on the menu. When we sift through those ancient garbage dumps at the workers' village, we find a staggering number of animal bones, so many that they paint a picture of a near-industrial scale butchery operation. This isn't the occasional fish or a rare wild bird. We're talking about the systematic, regular slaughter of cattle, sheep, and goats. The sheer volume of bones tells a clear story. Meat was not an occasional luxury for these laborers. It was a consistent and vital part of their official rations. This completely upends the old notion of a workforce surviving on meager subsistence. These men were consuming high-quality animal protein on a scale that would be the envy of many people in the ancient world. The organization behind this meat supply is a testament to the power and reach of the Egyptian state. This wasn't a matter of workers occasionally hunting for their own dinner. The evidence points to a centrally managed system where cattle were raised on official ranches in the Nile Delta, and sheep and goats were kept in large herds, all specifically designated to feed the massive labor force at Giza. The meat was almost certainly provided as part of their payment, a tangible part of their salary alongside the bread and beer. Think of it as a state-run benefits package, a calculated investment in human capital. The administrators of the Old Kingdom understood something profound. To move 2-ton blocks of limestone, you need incredibly strong men, and to build and maintain that kind of muscle, you need a diet rich in protein and fat. Providing regular meat was the most direct way to ensure the workforce had the physical strength and endurance for their Herculean task. But perhaps the most telling detail comes not just from the quantity of bones, but from their quality. The butchery marks and the specific parts of the animals found reveal something remarkable. The workers weren't just getting the leftover scraps, the tough, bony parts like feet and heads that were difficult to cook. Instead, they were receiving prime cuts, legs of beef, shoulders of mutton, and whole ribs. These are the meaty, fatty, nutrient-dense portions that provide the most energy. This indicates a deliberate and fair distribution system. The state wasn't dumping its inferior produce on the laborers. It was giving them the good stuff, recognizing that their physical output was directly tied to the quality of their input. For a laborer to sit down to a meal that included a stew made with a generous cut of beef was to receive a powerful message: your work is valued, and your strength is essential to this national project. This dietary privilege helped forge a sense of shared purpose, turning a massive construction site into a community bound by a common and surprisingly hearty table. But while the state supplied beef and mutton were a clear sign of their valued status, the pyramid builders also had access to another massive source of protein, one that flowed right past their doorstep, the Nile River. The archaeological evidence from the workers' village trash heaps reveals an astonishing quantity of fish bones belonging to the giants of the river, the mighty Nile perch, which could grow to well over 100 pounds, the abundant catfish, and various species of mullet. The sheer scale of these finds indicates that fish wasn't just an occasional treat. It was a dietary staple, as fundamental to their meals as bread and beer. This paints a picture of a highly efficient food system that leveraged every available resource, from the cultivated fields and herds on land to the teeming, self-renewing bounty of the world's longest river. The Nile was truly ancient Egypt's lifeline in every sense, and its role in feeding the workforce was absolutely critical. Unlike cattle, which required years of grazing land and careful husbandry, the fish of the Nile were a prolific and readily available resource. This provided a highly efficient and renewable way to meet the massive protein demands of thousands of laborers. Fishing could be done daily with nets, traps, and lines, supplying a steady stream of fresh food directly to the plateau. But the real genius of the Egyptian food system was in its preservation techniques. They couldn't rely on catching enough fresh fish every single day for such a huge population, so they employed simple yet brilliant methods to ensure a constant supply. The most common technique was sun drying. Fish would be gutted, split open, and laid out on racks under the intense, dry Egyptian sun. Within days, they would be completely desiccated, creating a stable, protein-rich food that could be stored for months without spoiling. They also used salting, packing fish in salt to draw out moisture and inhibit bacterial growth. These preserved fish became a durable, transportable, and incredibly reliable source of nutrition that could be easily rehydrated in stews or eaten as is. This constant availability of fish, both fresh and preserved, completely shatters the outdated idea of a monotonous or limited diet for the pyramid builders. It reveals a sophisticated and resilient supply chain that operated on multiple levels. While the state organized the delivery of grain and livestock, the procurement of fish likely involved both state-sponsored fishing expeditions and local smaller-scale operations that supplied the workers' village. This meant that a laborer's meal could feature a rich variety of flavors and textures, a hearty beef stew one day, and a savory dish of dried, reconstituted Nile perch the next, all accompanied by their coarse, nutritious bread and thick, filling beer. This dietary diversity wasn't just about keeping them from getting bored. It was about providing a wide spectrum of essential nutrients. Fish, in particular, offered high-quality protein, and in the case of fatty fish like certain Nile species, valuable omega-3 fatty acids, which would have contributed to reducing inflammation and supporting joint health, a crucial benefit for men engaged in a lifetime of physically crushing labor. The pyramid builders, therefore, were sustained by a diet that was not only calorie-dense, but also remarkably balanced, a testament to an ancient understanding that a nation's greatest monuments are built, quite literally, upon the health and strength of its people. So far, we've painted a picture of a diet rich in calories and protein, built on bread, beer, beef, and fish. But no meal is complete without the flavors and nutrients that tie everything together, and the pyramid builders had access to a surprising variety of garden vegetables that turned their basic rations into truly satisfying cuisine. Beyond the massive grain silos and bustling butcheries, there were also kitchen gardens and market stalls supplying a range of fresh, pungent, and crunchy plants that added both vital vitamins and powerful flavors to their daily stews and bread. The most common of these were the alliums, onions, garlic, and leeks. These weren't just minor garnishes, they were fundamental ingredients, the foundational aromatics of ancient Egyptian cooking. Imagine the scene in the workers' village as the evening meal was prepared. The sharp, unmistakable scent of onions and garlic sizzling in a pot over a fire, a smell that would have signaled home and comfort to workers returning from a grueling day at the plateau. These vegetables did more than just make food taste good. Garlic, in particular, was renowned in the ancient world for its perceived medicinal properties, believed to provide strength and ward off illness. For men living and working in close quarters, the antimicrobial qualities of these pungent bulbs may have offered very real health benefits, helping to keep the workforce healthy and on the job. Alongside these flavor powerhouses, the workers also enjoyed radishes and other leafy greens like lettuce. Radishes provided a crisp, peppery crunch, a refreshing contrast to the soft, stewed textures that dominated their meals. Lettuce, which the Egyptians associated with the god of fertility, Min, was eaten both raw and cooked. These vegetables were crucial sources of micronutrients that were less abundant in their staple foods. They provided vitamin C, which is essential for preventing scurvy and aiding in the repair of tissues, a critical function for bodies constantly healing from physical strain. They also offered folate and various antioxidants, contributing to overall health and energy levels. This isn't just speculation. Evidence for these vegetables comes from both the seeds and plant residues found at settlement sites, and they are frequently depicted in tomb paintings as offerings and food items, underscoring their ingrained role in the Egyptian diet. The inclusion of these fresh plants demonstrates a sophisticated, almost intuitive understanding of dietary balance. The state or the workers themselves were ensuring that their meals contained not just fuel for muscles, but also the necessary components for maintaining immune system health and overall vitality. But the true unsung heroes of the pyramid builders' diet, the ingredients that provided a rock-solid foundation of nutrition, were the humble legumes, lentils, chickpeas, and fava beans. These small, durable seeds were a nutritional powerhouse, and they were almost certainly a daily feature in the workers' bowls. Lentils, in particular, would have been a perfect staple for a large, organized workforce. They are easy to store for long periods without spoiling, simple to transport in large sacks, and incredibly efficient to cook. A large cauldron of lentils could be turned into a thick, hearty stew that fed many people with minimal effort. When combined with grains like emmer wheat or barley, legumes create a complete protein, meaning they provide all the essential amino acids the body needs to build and repair muscle. For the laborers, a meal of bread and lentil stew was a perfect nutritional synergy, delivering a sustained release of energy and the building blocks for physical recovery. Furthermore, legumes are packed with dietary fiber, which promotes digestive health and helps maintain stable blood sugar levels, preventing the energy crashes that could follow a meal based solely on simple carbohydrates. The preparation of these legumes was likely both simple and versatile. They could be slowly simmered into a thick, savory porridge, perhaps seasoned with those ever-present onions and garlic. They might be mashed and mixed with herbs and fat to form a kind of primitive falafel or bean cake. Fava beans, known in Egypt to this day as ful medames, were probably cooked in a similar way, slowly stewed until tender and bursting with flavor. This reliance on legumes reveals another layer of the logistical genius behind the pyramid construction. While cattle required vast grazing lands and fish depended on daily catch or preservation, legumes were a crop that could be reliably grown, harvested in massive quantities, and stored with ease in the dry climate. They represented a secure, efficient, and densely nutritious food source that perfectly complemented the other elements of the ration system. The combination of animal protein from meat and fish, complex carbohydrates from bread and beer, and the plant-based protein and fiber from legumes and vegetables created a remarkably well-rounded and healthy diet. This was not a menu of mere subsistence. It was a carefully composed nutritional strategy, engineered to sustain thousands of people through one of the most physically demanding projects in human history. The pyramid builders weren't just fed, they were nourished with a balance of flavors and nutrients that would be considered healthy and robust even by modern standards. And while the savory stews and hearty breads provided the foundational strength for the pyramid builders, no diet of such scale and sophistication would be complete without a touch of natural sweetness. Far from a purely utilitarian fuel, their meals also included delightful, energy-packed fruits that offered both a quick caloric boost and a much-needed moment of enjoyment after a long, arduous day. The crown jewel of this sweet side was without a doubt the date. The date palm was a cornerstone of life in ancient Egypt, a true gift of the Nile Valley that provided not just food, but also wood, fiber, and shade. For the laborers, dates were a perfect, portable power bar, incredibly rich in natural sugars like glucose and fructose. They provided a rapid source of energy that could be quickly metabolized by the body during intense physical exertion. A worker could easily carry a handful of these dense, sweet fruits in a pouch, eating them throughout the day for an immediate burst of stamina without needing to stop for a full meal. But their value went far beyond instant energy. Dates are also packed with potassium, a crucial electrolyte that helps prevent muscle cramps, a constant threat for men engaged in relentless lifting and hauling. Furthermore, their high fiber content ensured this sugar rush was sustained, preventing a sharp energy crash. And just as importantly, dates were incredibly durable. They could be dried in the sun and stored for months, even years, making them a reliable, non-perishable ration that could be easily integrated into the state's logistical planning, shipped up the Nile, and stockpiled at Giza to ensure a constant supply. But the dessert menu didn't stop there. The archaeological record gives us glimpses of other fruits that would have added variety and pleasure to their diet. Figs were another common find, their distinctive seeds preserved in the dry sediment of the workers' village. Soft, sweet, and rich in minerals, figs offered a different texture and flavor, and like dates, they could be easily dried for long-term storage. Grapes, too, were almost certainly part of their diet, consumed fresh when in season, their juicy burst providing hydration along with sugars. And just as we do today, the Egyptians understood the preserving power of their climate. turning grapes into raisins, concentrated, chewy morsels of energy that were even more portable and long-lasting than their fresh counterparts. Another fascinating fruit available to them was the sycamore fig, a fruit specific to the region that grows directly from the trunk of the sycamore tree. While not as sweet as the common fig, it was still a valuable source of nutrition, and its presence at settlement sites confirms that fruit consumption was a regular occurrence, not a rare luxury. The inclusion of these fruits speaks volumes about the human element behind this monumental effort. Providing dates, figs, and raisins was a brilliant logistical move, yes, but it was also a profound psychological one. Sweetness is a universally pleasurable taste, and the deliberate provision of these foods shows an understanding that morale was just as critical as muscle. A sweet date at the end of a shift, a handful of raisins shared among a crew, these small acts would have provided a genuine lift to the spirit, a moment of simple happiness and comfort. It transformed the daily ration from mere sustenance into something more rewarding, fostering a sense of well-being and contentment. This practice connects us directly to the humanity of these ancient workers. They weren't mindless automatons. They were men who appreciated the taste of something sweet, who found joy in a simple piece of fruit, and who would have felt valued by a system that provided such pleasures. This attention to dietary morale is a subtle but powerful clue into the social contract of the time, a contract that understood that to achieve the impossible, you needed to care for the whole person, body and spirit alike. The pyramids, therefore, stand not only as a testament to ancient engineering, but also to an early, sophisticated understanding of human motivation and the power of a well-considered meal. Of course, a diet so rich in protein and complex carbohydrates would still be missing a crucial component without the element that truly brings flavor and satisfaction to a meal: fats and oils. For the pyramid builders engaged in relentless physical exertion, dietary fat wasn't just a luxury, it was an absolutely essential source of concentrated energy. While our modern minds might jump to olive oil, that was a later introduction to Egypt. The primary sources of fat for these workers came from a practical and readily available supply, the very animals they were already eating. When cattle, sheep, and goats were butchered in the workers' village, nothing would have been wasted. The copious fat deposits from these animals would have been carefully trimmed, collected, and rendered down. This process of rendering involves slowly heating the solid fat until it melts into a clear, liquid state, which then cools into a semi-solid form we recognize as tallow or suet. This rendered animal fat was the cooking oil and shortening of the ancient Egyptian kitchen. Imagine a large ceramic pot simmering over a fire, not with stew, but with chunks of white fat slowly melting into a precious golden liquid. This tallow was incredibly versatile. It could be used for frying onions and garlic to create a flavorful base for a stew, adding a rich, savory depth. It could be rubbed onto the inside of bread molds to prevent the dough from sticking, or even mixed directly into the flour to create a more tender, calorie-dense loaf. Every spoonful of fat added a massive boost of calories, providing the long-lasting energy reserves needed for sustained, heavy labor in a way that carbohydrates and protein alone could not. Beyond the realm of animal fats, there is compelling evidence that the pyramid builders also had access to precious plant-based oils. While the evidence is more indirect than the vast piles of animal bones, artifacts and artistic depictions point to the use of oils extracted from plants like sesame, castor, and linseed, also known as flax. The process for extracting these oils was simple but required significant effort. Seeds would be crushed using a mortar and pestle or ground on a quern, much like grain. The resulting paste would then be placed into a porous cloth bag and subjected to intense pressure, often by twisting the bag with two sticks in a method similar to using a tourniquet. This would force the precious oil to seep out, leaving behind a dry seed cake. Sesame oil would have provided a nutty, flavorful addition to foods, while castor and linseed oils had a more pungent character. It's important to note that these plant oils were likely far more valuable and less common than animal tallow, perhaps used in smaller quantities or reserved for specific purposes. The presence of these oils reveals a sophisticated understanding of the different resources available in their environment. It shows they weren't relying on a single source for their nutritional needs, but were actively cultivating and processing a variety of plants to create a diverse and resilient food supply. The role of these fats and oils extended far beyond just adding flavor or calories. They were fundamental to the workers' overall health and their ability to absorb nutrients from their food. Many essential vitamins, such as vitamin A from their leafy greens and vitamin D, are fat-soluble. This means that without dietary fat present in the digestive system, the body simply cannot absorb and utilize these critical nutrients. A worker consuming a salad of lettuce and radishes without any oil-based dressing would be missing out on a significant portion of the vitamins he was eating. By cooking their vegetables in animal fat or drizzling them with little sesame oil, they were unconsciously unlocking the full nutritional potential of their meal. This ensured they were getting the vitamins necessary for good vision, immune function, and bone health, the latter being absolutely critical for men constantly stressing their skeletons. Furthermore, fat is what creates a feeling of true satiety, the deep satisfaction that comes after a hearty meal. A stew made with lean meat and vegetables might fill the stomach, but a stew enriched with a generous scoop of rendered sheep fat would keep a laborer feeling full and energized for hours, preventing the gnawing hunger that could sap his strength and focus during a long afternoon of moving stone blocks. This careful, almost intuitive balancing of macronutrients, carbs, protein, and fat is what made the pyramid builder's diet so remarkably effective and scientifically sound, even by today's standards. Walking through the excavated ruins of the workers' village, the most striking features aren't the barracks or the administrative buildings, but the sprawling, purpose-built bakery complexes. These weren't the cozy, single-oven kitchens of a private home. They were the ancient equivalent of industrial food factories, designed for one thing only: mass production on a staggering scale. Imagine a long, open-air structure, its floor a patchwork of fire pits, and its walls lined with thousands of distinctive bell-shaped clay pots, each one a custom-made baking mold. The layout was meticulously organized for efficiency, a production line carved into the desert floor. In one area, workers would be mixing vast troughs of dough using the coarse flour ground hours earlier on the nearby saddle corns. The air would be thick with the yeasty, slightly sour smell of fermentation, a sign that the natural yeasts from their beer brewing operations were already at work, causing the dough to rise and develop its characteristic tang. This wasn't a small batch process. Archaeologists have uncovered bakeries with multiple, identical workstations, suggesting that several crews could operate simultaneously, each one responsible for turning out hundreds of loaves in a single shift. The entire operation was a symphony of coordinated motion, from mixing and portioning to the final, fiery baking, all orchestrated to achieve a single, monumental goal: keep the workforce fed. The heart of this bakery, and the key to understanding its industrial capacity, was the unique baking technology itself: the rows and rows of conical bread molds, known to archaeologists as beja. These were not reusable baking sheets. They were single-use, disposable cooking vessels. The process was both ingenious and incredibly labor-intensive. Dozens of these heavy clay pots would be preheated in a deep, charcoal-filled fire pit until their interiors were glowing hot. Using long, forked sticks, bakers would then carefully lift each searingly hot mold from the fire, swiftly pour a portion of the wet, fermented dough inside, and then stack them closely together in a different pit, where the residual heat would continue to cook the loaf. The intense, trapped heat would instantly create a hard crust on the outside while the inside steamed, resulting in a dense, well-cooked bread that was easy to store and transport. Once the bread was done and the mold had cooled, the loaf was extracted by simply breaking the clay pot away from it. The evidence for this is everywhere at the site. The ground is literally paved with the shattered fragments of these spent bread molds, forming a thick ceramic carpet that speaks to the relentless daily cycle of production and consumption. The scale is almost incomprehensible. One excavated bakery complex contained enough molds to produce an estimated several thousand loaves of bread every single day. This was not a cottage industry. It was a state-sponsored assembly line for carbohydrates. Crucially, this bakery was never a standalone operation. It was intrinsically linked, both physically and functionally, to the brewery right next door. The two processes shared the same base ingredients, emmer wheat and barley, and the same biological catalyst, yeast. In a beautiful piece of symbiotic efficiency, the crumbly, partially baked loaves of malted barley used to make beer could also be used as a starter culture for the bread dough, introducing the yeast needed for leavening. Conversely, the fermented dregs from the beer vats could be mixed into the bread dough, adding flavor and ensuring no valuable nutrients were wasted. The brewery itself was a mirror of the bakery's scale, featuring rows of large ceramic vats, each one capable of holding gallons of the fermenting grain mash that would become beer. The entire food production quadrant of the workers' village was a single, integrated metabolic engine, a place where grain came in one end and the two foundational staples of the Egyptian diet, bread and beer, came out the other, ready for distribution. This co-location wasn't just convenient, it was logistically essential, minimizing transport and streamlining the entire supply chain for the state administrators overseeing the operation. This brings us to the undeniable conclusion that this was all a centrally planned, state-run enterprise. The uniformity of the bakery layouts, the standardized design of the bread molds, and the sheer monumental investment in infrastructure all point to a single, powerful organizing force, the royal administration of the pharaoh. This was not a collection of private entrepreneurs selling to the workers. This was a nationalized ration system in action. The grain was likely collected as tax from farms across Egypt, transported by boat to a harbor near Giza, processed in these state-owned facilities, and then distributed as daily wages to the workforce. The existence of these industrial bakeries proves that the pyramid project was not just about architecture and engineering. It was a massive exercise in human resource management. The state understood that its most critical resource was not the limestone from Tura or the granite from Aswan, but the physical strength and morale of the thousands of men who moved it. By guaranteeing a steady, reliable, and surprisingly high-quality supply of food, the administration was ensuring the project's continuity. A hungry worker is a weak and discontented worker. A well-fed worker, receiving his daily measure of bread and beer, is a productive and loyal one. The bakery, therefore, was more than just a place to make food. It was a pillar of social stability, a tangible symbol of the state's investment in its people, and a key piece of logistical machinery that made the impossible ambition of the pyramids achievable daily reality. The scale of this meat distribution becomes truly staggering when we examine the archaeological footprint of the butchery operations themselves. Just beyond the confines of the workers' village, excavators have uncovered areas dedicated specifically to the processing of animals on an almost industrial level. These were not simple campfires for roasting a single goat. We're talking about spaces littered with the flakes from countless sharpened flint knives, heavy stone cleavers used for breaking bone, and large, flat slabs that served as chopping blocks. The ground in these areas is often stained with high concentrations of phosphates, a chemical residue left by the blood and organic matter from mass slaughter, painting a vivid picture of a bustling, bloody, and highly efficient abattoir. The sheer volume of bone fragments in the adjacent trash heaps, all from a limited range of animals, primarily cattle, sheep, and goats, confirms that this was a centralized, systematic operation. This wasn't occasional, opportunistic hunting. This was a continuous, managed supply chain of animal protein, a river of meat flowing directly from state-controlled sources to the workers' mess halls. Perhaps the most compelling evidence for this state-level organization comes not from the village itself, but from a remarkable discovery made nearby, dedicated cattle burial grounds. These were not random pits, but organized cemeteries for livestock. Here, archaeologists have found the complete skeletons of prime-aged oxen, carefully interred in their own graves, sometimes with their heads oriented in a specific direction. This respectful burial practice is profoundly telling. It suggests that these animals were not just anonymous units of meat. They were valuable assets, likely raised in official herds managed by the state or powerful temples. Burying them intact, rather than just discarding the bones after butchering, indicates a recognition of their economic and symbolic worth. These cattle were the living, breathing capital of the pyramid project, the walking, grazing fuel reserves that powered the entire endeavor. The existence of such a cemetery points to a sophisticated level of animal husbandry and resource management, where herds were bred, raised, and culled according to a master plan designed to sustain the massive population at Giza for decades. But the most revealing detail of all is found in the specific cuts of meat that made their way to the workers' tables. When archaeologists analyze the animal bones from the trash heaps, they don't find a random assortment of parts. There is a clear statistical bias towards the meatiest, most desirable portions of the animal, the upper forelimbs and hind limbs, the shoulders, and the haunches. These are the prime cuts, the roasts and steaks of the ancient world, packed with dense muscle and rich, energy-providing fat. This pattern is absolutely crucial because it shatters the old idea that laborers were simply given the leftovers, the feet, the heads, the tough and bony scraps that the elite wouldn't want. On the contrary, the evidence shows they were receiving the very best parts of the animal. This was a deliberate distribution strategy, one that speaks volumes about the value placed on the workforce. Providing these choice cuts was a direct investment in human performance. A worker fed a steady diet of lean, scrappy meat would lack the energy and stamina for his task. But a worker consuming fatty, nutrient-dense beef from a haunch or shoulder was building and maintaining the powerful physique required to haul stone blocks up massive ramps day after day. This system of meat distribution almost certainly functioned as both a regular ration and a powerful reward mechanism. It's easy to imagine that a standard daily or weekly ration included a portion of stewed beef or mutton, providing a consistent baseline of protein. But the occasional distribution of a large, recognizable prime cut, an entire roasted leg or shoulder for a crew to share, would have been a moment of celebration and recognition. This practice would have fostered a powerful sense of camaraderie and competition among the different work gangs, whose proud names, like the drunkards of Menkora, we found inscribed in the pyramids. A feast of fresh, roasted beef would have been a tangible reward for meeting a quota, for successfully maneuvering a particularly difficult block into place, or for marking an important religious festival. This transformed the basic act of eating from mere sustenance into a motivational tool, a way to publicly acknowledge and reinforce the critical importance of their labor. The system was a brilliant piece of social engineering, ensuring that the workforce felt not just fed, but valued and respected, their immense physical contribution recognized with the most prized food their society could offer. All of this evidence from the kitchens and trash heaps is incredibly compelling, but there's another source of information that gives us an even more intimate look into the lives of these workers, one that comes directly from their own bodies. The skeletal remains from the worker cemetery at Giza provide a biological archive, a permanent record of the physical toll of their labor, and crucially, the fuel that sustained them through it. And the most revealing part of that record is found not in their bones, but in their mouths. The teeth of the pyramid builders tell a story written in microscopic scratches, grooves, and were patterns that directly confirm and enrich the picture we built from the archaeology. When bioarchaeologists examine these teeth under magnification, they see two dominant telling features. First, there is the unmistakable signature of a diet dominated by coarse stone-ground bread. The flour used to make their daily loaves was filled with tiny, abrasive particles, fine sand from the desert, and more significantly, minute fragments of stone that wore off from the granite and sandstone querns used for grinding the grain. Every single bite of bread was like gently sanding down their teeth with a very fine grit. Over a lifetime, this created a distinct pattern of extreme wear, flattening the chewing surfaces of their molars and premolars far beyond what we see in modern population. This wasn't a sign of poor dental hygiene. It was a direct physical consequence of their primary food source, a mark left by the very fuel of the pyramids. The second major dental clue is perhaps even more telling, a remarkable lack of cavities. While their teeth were heavily worn down, they show very little evidence of the decay caused by sugar. This is a critical piece of the puzzle. It tells us that while their diet was high in carbohydrates from bread and beer, those carbohydrates were primarily complex and unrefined. The sugars they consumed were not the simple, processed sugars that wreak havoc on modern teeth. Instead, they came from the slow-breaking starches in emmer wheat and barley, and the natural sugars in fruits like dates and figs, which are less cariogenic, meaning less likely to cause tooth decay. The thick, porridge-like beer they drank was certainly sugary, but it was a product of fermentation, not of added sweeteners. This combination of factors, a diet free from refined sugar and rich in coarse, fibrous foods that help clean the teeth, resulted in surprisingly healthy dental conditions from a decay perspective. Their teeth were being worn down by their food, but they weren't being rotted from the inside out by it. This bioarchaeological evidence doesn't just sit in isolation, it forms a powerful, mutually reinforcing loop with the archaeological finds. The heavy dental ware perfectly matches the discovery of the countless saddle querns, and the charred remains of coarse, whole-grain bread in the conical pots. The lack of cavities corroborates the absence of any evidence for refined sugar or honey in the workers' village on a large scale. While honey was known and prized in ancient Egypt, it was an expensive luxury item, likely reserved for the elite and for ceremonial purposes. It was not a staple that would have been distributed in the massive rations needed for a workforce of thousands. The dental record, therefore, acts as a physical audit of the archaeological record. It confirms that the food remains we find in the trash heaps and kitchens weren't just occasional treats or ceremonial offerings. They represent the true day-in, day-out diet that shaped the very biology of the people who consumed it. Beyond just wear and tear, scientists are now using even more advanced techniques to extract information from these ancient teeth. The analysis of dental calculus, which is hardened plaque, has become a revolutionary tool in bioarchaeology. This calcified material effectively traps and preserves a microscopic time capsule of a person's life, including tiny phytoliths from plants, starch granules from grains, and even fibers from meat. By carefully dissolving this calculus and examining the contents under powerful microscopes, researchers can identify the specific types of plants a person ate. For the pyramid builders, this has revealed traces of tubers like sedges and other gritty, sandy plants that grew along the Nile, adding another layer of vegetable matter to their diet that would have otherwise left no trace in the archaeological record. Furthermore, isotopic analysis of the teeth and bones themselves provides a long-term dietary signature. By measuring the ratios of different isotopes of carbon and nitrogen, scientists can distinguish between diets based on different types of plants like wheat and barley versus millet, and determine the relative amount of animal protein a person consumed over the last decade or so of their life. For the Giza workers, these isotopic signatures consistently point to a diet high in the grains we've discussed, and crucially, confirm a significant and regular intake of animal protein, directly supporting the story told by the vast piles of cattle and fish bones. The evidence from their very skeletons leaves no room for doubt. These were well-nourished individuals, powered by a balanced and robust diet that was perfectly engineered for the monumental task at hand. So when we step back and look at this incredible menu, the industrial scale bread, the nutritious beer, the prime cuts of meat, the bounty of the Nile, and the fresh vegetables and fruits, it forces a fundamental question. How did the diet of these laborers actually compare to what was being served in the palace of the pharaoh himself? The answer reveals a crucial truth about Old Kingdom society. While there was certainly a hierarchy in the variety and luxury of foods available, the pyramid builders shared a remarkably similar core diet with the highest elites in the land. The essential pillars of bread, beer, meat, and fish were universal staples, consumed from the royal court down to the workers' village. This wasn't a case of the elites eating one type of food and the masses eating something completely different. The difference lay in the refinement, the diversity, and the sheer spectacle of the meals. For a pharaoh or a high-ranking noble, a meal was a performance of power and piety. Yes, they ate bread and beer, but their bread was often made from the finest, most thoroughly sifted flour, resulting in a whiter, softer loaf that was less abrasive on the teeth. Their beer could be infused with exotic spices or fruits like pomegranate or dates for added flavor. When it came to meat, the elite table featured a much wider menagerie. Alongside the prime beef and mutton that the workers enjoyed, the tombs of nobles are painted with scenes of hunting desert game like gazelle and oryx, and they had access to fowl like geese and crane, even the prized cuts of a wild hippopotamus. Their feasts included extravagant dishes like roasted hyena, a practice documented in tomb inscriptions that was likely as much about displaying dominion over the chaotic forces of nature as it was about taste. The most significant distinction was in their access to luxury imports and rare sweeteners. While the workers snacked on dates and figs, the elite could sweeten their foods and wines with precious honey, a commodity so valuable it was used as an offering to the gods. They also enjoyed foods that had to be traded for over vast distances, like oils from the Levant or wine from Canaan, transported in distinctive ceramic jars that archaeologists find almost exclusively in royal and elite context. Yet, for all this extra variety and opulence, the nutritional foundation was strikingly parallel, the worker fueling his body to move a stone block and the priest performing rituals in the temple were both running on the same basic engine: complex carbohydrates from grain and sustained energy from animal protein. This is what makes the workers' diet so revolutionary to understand. They were not at the bottom of the nutritional ladder. They were occupying a very solid, middle to upper tier within the ancient Egyptian food system. The state provisioning system ensured they received the same high-quality, strength-building foods that were considered the birthright of the Egyptian elite. A laborer might not taste honey-roasted gazelle, but he was regularly eating the same nourishing beef stew and fresh Nile perch that sustained the scribes, artisans, and administrators. This shared culinary culture would have fostered a powerful sense of common identity. Everyone, from the highest official to the humblest laborer, understood the intrinsic value of a loaf of bread and a jug of beer. It was the cultural and nutritional currency of the nation. This deliberate provisioning strategy reveals a sophisticated understanding of social contract and labor management. By providing a diet that mirrored, in its essentials, the diet of the privileged classes, the state was making a powerful statement to the workforce. It said, "Your work is of national importance, you are not disposable." Feeding them low-quality scraps would have bred resentment and instability, creating a weak link in a decades-long project. But providing them with hearty, desirable food, the very same foods they knew the elite valued cultivated loyalty and a sense of shared investment in the monumental goal. It transformed the back-breaking work from a punishment into a form of national service that came with tangible, respected rewards. The pyramid was not just the pharaoh's tomb, it was a project that unified the entire society, and the shared diet was a daily reminder of that unity. The workers were not slaves living on the edge of starvation. They were well-compensated civil servants, whose strength was so vital to the state's ambition that they were fed a diet fit for the very people they were building for. This level of care and investment in the common laborer is one of the most compelling reasons why the pyramids could be built at all, standing for millennia as a testament not only to engineering genius, but to the power of a well-fed, motivated workforce. Now that we understand the variety and quality of the food, we can ask a truly staggering question: just how much of it did they need to eat? The physical labor of quarrying, hauling, and precisely placing multi-ton stone blocks is arguably one of the most demanding activities a human body can perform. Modern estimates, based on studies of athletes and laborers in heavy construction, suggest that each worker likely required an astonishing 3,000 to 5,000 calories every single day just to maintain their body weight and strength. To put that into a modern perspective, that's the equivalent of the daily intake recommended for a professional cyclist during the Tour de France, or a competitive swimmer in peak training. This wasn't a lifestyle of moderate activity. It was a constant, grueling marathon of strength and endurance, and their bodies were the engines that demanded immense, high-quality fuel. So how did the state-provided rations actually add up to meet this colossal energy requirement? Let's break down a plausible daily menu. The foundation was, without a doubt, bread and beer. Historical records from other Egyptian sites give us a standard ration for a laborer: about 10 loaves of bread and 1/3 to a full jug of beer per day. Now, each of those coarse, dense emmer wheat loaves could have delivered between 300 and 500 calories. 10 loaves would therefore provide a baseline of 3,000 to 5,000 calories from bread alone. Then add in the beer. A single jug of that thick, nutritious gruel-like beverage could easily contribute another 1,000 to 1,500 calories. Just from these two staple items, a worker was already consuming a minimum of 4,000 calories, and potentially much more, before we even consider the meat, fish, and vegetables. This perfectly illustrates the dietary strategy: a massive, relentless intake of complex carbohydrates from grains to provide the sustained, slow-burning energy needed for hours of continuous labor. But carbohydrates alone aren't enough to build and repair the powerful muscle tissue being broken down by such extreme exertion. This is where the regular distributions of beef, mutton, and fish became absolutely critical. Protein is the essential building block for muscle recovery, and a worker engaged in this level of activity would have needed a minimum of 100 to 150 grams of protein daily. A single generous portion of beef, weighing around half a pound, could provide over 50 grams of pure protein. When you combine that with the protein from the bread, lentils, and fish, it becomes clear that their diet was meticulously calibrated to meet this physiological demand. Furthermore, the fat from that meat and from the rendered tallow used in cooking provided the dense, concentrated calories that are far more efficient for energy storage than carbohydrates. A meal featuring a fatty cut of beef stewed with onions and lentils wasn't just flavorful. It was a targeted delivery system for the exact nutrients required to repair muscle microtears and replenish energy reserves overnight, ensuring the worker could get up and do it all over again the next day. This wasn't a system of mere subsistence. It was a brilliant, ancient form of performance nutrition. The administrators of the Old Kingdom may not have had the words macronutrients or calories, but they possessed a profound, practical understanding of the link between food and physical output. They knew that a man lifting a 2-ton block needed a certain volume and quality of fuel, and they engineered their entire supply chain to deliver it with remarkable precision. The sheer scale of the bakery and brewery operations we've uncovered proves this was a calculated, industrial-level investment. This intentional, high-calorie provisioning system fundamentally changes our perception of the workers' lives. They weren't starving, desperate figures. They were the ancient world's equivalent of elite athletes, whose bodies were recognized as the most valuable machinery on the project. The state fed them not out of charity, but out of sheer necessity, because every single block moved into place was a direct result of the energy metabolized from their daily bread, their strengthening beer, and their restorative meat. This incredible year-round diet didn't exist in a vacuum. It was intimately tied to the heartbeat of Egypt itself, the annual flooding of the Nile. For 3 months each year, from roughly July to October, the world of the Egyptian farmer transformed. The Nile would overflow its banks, spreading a layer of fertile, mineral-rich silt across the floodplain, but also submerging the fields and bringing agricultural work to a complete standstill. This period, known as the inundation or Akhet, was a time of both crisis and opportunity for the pyramid project. With the fields underwater and the farming population temporarily idle, this was the perfect moment for the state to mobilize a massive supplementary labor force. Historians and archaeologists now believe that the scale of construction at Giza would have surged during these months, as tens of thousands of additional conscripts were brought in from the countryside to work on the pyramids, taking advantage of the seasonal pause in their normal lives. This created a monumental logistical challenge: how you feed a workforce that may have temporarily swelled to unprecedented numbers, precisely when the land is at its least productive for fresh food. The answer lies in one of the most sophisticated administrative systems of the ancient world. The Egyptian state, through its network of temples and regional governors, collected grain as a form of taxation from every farm in the country. This grain, the very emmer wheat and barley that were the foundation of life, was not immediately consumed. Instead, it was funneled into a nationwide network of state granaries. These were not small sheds, but massive, sealed silos and vast, secure storehouses, often attached to temples and royal palaces, functioning as the strategic grain reserve for the entire nation. The surplus collected during the plentiful years and the abundant harvests following the flood was carefully stored away, creating a buffer against famine and, just as importantly, fueling state projects like the pyramids during the agriculturally fallow inundation month. During the flood season, these granaries became the absolute lifeblood of Giza. While the river raged outside, the state bakeries and breweries inside the workers' village would have been operating at a fever pitch, running day and night. The grain, safe and dry in storage, was released from the granaries and transported to the plateau to be ground, baked, and brewed into the endless supply of bread and beer needed for the intensified workforce. This system turned a potential period of scarcity into one of peak productivity. The state, by controlling this essential resource, could smooth out the bumps of the natural world, ensuring that the rhythm of construction never missed a beat. The workers toiling on the ramps under the summer sun were being powered by the foresight and planning of a bureaucracy that thought in terms of decades, not just seasons. Their daily loaf was a direct result of a tax collected months or even years earlier, a tangible symbol of the centralized power that made the pyramids possible. But grain was only part of the equation. A diet of just bread and beer, while calorie-rich, wouldn't have sustained the workers' strength for long. This is where the advanced preservation techniques we discussed earlier became absolutely critical. The state's strategy for protein during the inundation was a masterclass in foresight. Throughout the year, but especially after the successful harvests, there would have been a systematic campaign of hunting, fishing, and slaughtering livestock. While a significant amount of fresh meat was consumed immediately, a huge portion was deliberately preserved for future use. The evidence for sun-dried and salted fish is overwhelming. The Nile's bounty was captured and transformed into a stable, non-perishable commodity. Similarly, surplus cattle, sheep, and goats were butchered, and their meat was likely preserved through salting, drying, or smoking. While the evidence for large-scale salting in Old Kingdom Egypt is less direct than for fish drying, it is a logical and well-documented practice in contemporary societies, and the sheer volume of meat required makes some form of preservation a near certainty. Imagine the supply caravans arriving at Giza during the flood, not just with sacks of grain, but with bundles of dried Nile perch, sides of salted beef, and containers of rendered fat, all stockpiled during the seasons of plenty. The workers' meals during this time would have shifted in character, but not in nutritional value. A fresh fish stew might be replaced by one made with dried, reconstituted fish, rehydrated in water, and flavored with stored onions and garlic. A roasted haunch of beef might give way to a hearty stew made with salted meat, slowly simmered to tenderness. The diet remained robust and protein-packed, but it relied on the state's ability to think ahead, to create a buffer of preserved goods that could bridge the gap when fresh production was impossible. This wasn't a makeshift solution. It was a deliberate, calculated food security strategy. The administrators weren't just reacting to the seasons, they were using them, building a resilient supply chain that could withstand the annual disruption and even leverage it to their advantage. The pyramid, rising ever higher during the inundation, was a monument not just to stone, but to stored grain, preserved fish, and the brilliant, long-term planning of a society that had learned to harness the rhythm of its river. This system of providing food wasn't just about keeping people from going hungry. It was the very engine of the ancient Egyptian economy. In a world centuries away from coinage, the most reliable and universally desired commodities became the standard units of exchange. And at the very top of that list were the two pillars of life itself, bread and beer. These weren't just staples, they were a form of currency, a means of storing value, and the official method for the state to pay its employees. For the pyramid builders, their daily labor was compensated with a direct, tangible wage of nourishment. We have administrative records from other sites, inscriptions on flakes of limestone or pottery known as ostraka, that detail these standard daily rations. A laborer might be allocated 10 loaves of bread and 1/3 of a large jug of beer, while a foreman or a scribe holding a position of greater responsibility could receive a significantly larger share, perhaps 20 loaves and 2 full jugs. This wasn't a vague promise of sustenance. It was a calculated, formal salary, as regular and expected as a modern paycheck. This economic model was a stroke of genius for a state undertaking a project as massive and long-term as a pyramid. By paying workers directly with the food they needed to survive, the administration effectively removed a critical logistical hurdle. Imagine if every one of those thousands of workers had been responsible for growing their own food. They would have needed to be released for months every year to tend to their fields along the Nile, bringing the entire monumental construction project to a grinding halt during planting and harvest seasons. The pyramid would have taken not 20 or 30 years, but centuries. Instead, the state's centralized ration system freed the entire workforce from agricultural duties. It allowed for full-time, year-round dedication to construction. These men were, in essence, the world's first large-scale, specialized civil engineers and skilled laborers, their basic survival needs completely managed by their employer. This created a professional class of builders who could develop and hone their techniques over a lifetime, passing knowledge from father to son, all while being insulated from the uncertainties of drought or poor harvest that would have plagued a traditional farmer. The implications of this system extended far beyond the Giza plateau, creating a powerful economic feedback loop that strengthened the entire kingdom. The grain used to make the bread and beer for the workers was collected as a tax from farming villages all along the Nile Valley. Farmers would hand over a portion of their harvest to the state's representatives, who would then ship it to central granaries. From there, it was distributed to state-sponsored projects like the pyramids, but also to the army, to priests, and to other government officials. This cycle transformed agricultural surplus into national power. A farmer in a distant province, by paying his grain tax, was literally fueling the construction of a monument that defined his civilization's identity, even if he never set eyes on it himself. His contribution was baked into the very loaves that gave a worker the strength to lift a block into place. This created a deeply interconnected economy where everyone, from the humblest farmer to the most skilled artisan, had a role in the state's grand ambitions, all facilitated by the common currency of bread and beer. Receiving this wage in such a direct, physical form also had a profound psychological impact on the workforce. There is a powerful sense of security and value that comes from knowing your next meal is guaranteed, especially when you are engaged in exhausting, dangerous work. Every evening, when a worker received his measured ration of dense bread and thick beer, it was a tangible, immediate reward for his day's labor. He could see and hold the fruit of his efforts right in his hands. This direct exchange fostered a sense of fairness and order. It built trust between the labor force and the state administrators, reinforcing the idea that this back-breaking work was a recognized and compensated service. It transformed the relationship from one of potential exploitation into a mutual agreement. The state provided the fuel, and the workers provided the muscle. Together, they were achieving something eternal. This system of payment in kind didn't just build pyramids. It built social cohesion, turning a massive construction site into a community bound by a shared purpose and a shared meal, proving that the most effective currency isn't always gold or silver. Sometimes it's a warm loaf of bread and a satisfying jug of beer. When we step back and analyze this entire menu through a modern nutritional lens, the picture that emerges is nothing short of astonishing. This wasn't just a diet of abundance. It was a diet of remarkable balance and sophistication, meticulously engineered to meet the extreme demands placed on the human body. The coarse, gritty bread that was the cornerstone of every meal, while hard on their teeth, was a powerhouse of complex carbohydrates. Unlike the refined white flours common today, this whole grain emmer and barley flour was packed with dietary fiber and B vitamins, providing a slow, steady release of energy that prevented the spikes and crashes associated with simple sugars. This was the perfect fuel for sustained, endurance-based labor, keeping their energy levels stable throughout a long, grueling shift moving stone blocks. The protein component of their diet was equally impressive, both in its quantity and its quality. They weren't relying on a single source. Instead, they benefited from a powerful synergy of animal and plant-based proteins. The regular consumption of prime beef, mutton, and goat provided all the essential amino acids needed for rapid muscle repair and growth, along with heme iron, which is far more easily absorbed by the body than the iron from plants. This is crucially supplemented by the massive quantities of fish from the Nile, which delivered not only high-quality protein, but also, in the case of fatty fish like the Nile perch, valuable omega-3 fatty acids. These fats are renowned today for their anti-inflammatory properties, which would have been essential for reducing joint and muscle inflammation caused by daily, intense physical strain. And then, completing this protein trifecta, were the lentils, chickpeas, and fava beans. When combined with the grains in their bread, these legumes formed a complete protein, ensuring that even on days when meat rations were lighter, their bodies still received the necessary building blocks for recovery. This nutritional strategy extended brilliantly into the realm of micronutrients, the vitamins and minerals that are vital for overall health and metabolic function. The vegetables they consumed, particularly the alliums like onions and garlic, were rich in vitamin C, a critical antioxidant that supports the immune system and aids in the absorption of iron from their plant-based food. The leafy greens and radishes provided folate and other essential compounds. Their access to fruit, especially dates, offered a potent source of potassium to prevent muscle cramps and natural sugars for quick energy. Even their primary beverage, beer, contributed significant B vitamins from the yeast, which are essential for converting food into usable energy. This diverse intake of fruits and vegetables meant they were receiving a wide spectrum of antioxidants and phytonutrients, which would have helped their bodies combat the oxidative stress that comes with extreme physical exertion. The result of this comprehensive dietary approach is vividly written in their skeletal remains. Studies of the workers' bones show a population that was generally robust and well developed. The evidence points to strong bone density, a sign of adequate calcium and vitamin D intake, the latter of which was likely synthesized from ample sun exposure. There are few signs of the dietary deficiencies like rickets or scurvy that plagued many historical populations. When we compare their nutritional status to that of other pre-industrial laborers, the contrast is stark. The medieval European peasant, for instance, often subsisted on a monotonous diet of porridge and dark bread, with meat being a rare luxury. Their diet was often deficient in protein and several key vitamins, leading to stunted growth, dental problems, and a general susceptibility to disease. The pyramid builders, by comparison, enjoyed a level of food security and dietary quality that would have been the envy of most people in the ancient and medieval world. This brings us to the most powerful conclusion of all. The diet of the pyramid builders was categorically not the diet of slaves. A system of slavery, by its very nature, is built on extraction and minimal investment. A slave owner has little incentive to provide high-quality protein like prime cuts of beef, or to invest in industrial-scale bakeries and breweries. The goal is subsistence at the lowest possible cost. What we see at Giza is the exact opposite: a massive, calculated investment in the health and strength of the workforce. The state provided a diet that was not only sufficient but optimal for the task at hand. It was a diet designed for performance, for resilience, and for longevity within the project. This robust, balanced nutrition was a non-negotiable prerequisite for the construction of the pyramids. It was the literal fuel that powered an engineering miracle, proving that the ancient Egyptians understood a fundamental truth that modern science continues to affirm: you cannot build for eternity with bodies that are starving or malnourished. The enduring strength of the pyramids is, in many ways, a direct reflection of the enduring strength of the people who built them, a strength forged in the kitchens and breweries of the workers' village. This overwhelming evidence of a rich and varied diet forces a final, decisive confrontation with the most stubborn myth of all: the image of the half-starved slave, driven by the whip and sustained by meager scraps. For decades, Hollywood and popular fiction have seared this dramatic but false narrative into our collective imagination. It's a compelling story of oppression, but it is a story that the trash heaps of Giza categorically refute. Let's be perfectly clear: the diet we have just detailed, a diet featuring prime cuts of beef, abundant fish, industrial-scale bread and beer, and fresh vegetables, is not, and has never been, the diet of a slave. To understand why, we need to examine what the diet of actual slaves in the ancient world typically looked like. and the contrast could not be more stark. Consider the reality of chattel slavery in other contemporary civilizations, like later in Rome or Greece. The primary economic logic of such systems was to extract the maximum amount of labor for the absolute minimum investment in the laborer's well-being. Slaves were often viewed as disposable tools, and their food reflected this status. Historical records from these societies describe slave rations as monotonous and nutritionally inadequate, often consisting of the cheapest possible calories. We're talking about a thin, watery gruel known as poles in Rome, made from inferior grains like spelt, or in some cases, a simple, hard bread made from the bran and chaff left over after milling the fine flour for the masters. Meat was an extreme rarity, perhaps a bit of cheap, salted pork on a festival day, but never a regular ration of fresh, prime beef. The goal was bare subsistence, just enough to keep the slave alive and working, with no thought given to building strength or maintaining long-term health. The skeletal remains of slaves from these contexts often show signs of stunted growth, anemia, and vitamin deficiencies, conditions completely absent from the robust skeletons of the Giza workers. Now, place that grim reality next to the Egyptian evidence. The pyramid builders received a daily wage in high-quality food that was deliberately designed for peak physical performance. The state wasn't providing the minimum, it was providing the optimum. This was not an act of royal generosity. It was a brilliant and pragmatic understanding of a fundamental economic principle that holds true even today: well-fed workers are productive workers. The administrators of the Old Kingdom were, in effect, master economists. They conducted a simple but profound cost-benefit analysis. What is the cost of feeding a workforce of thousands a diet of prime beef and fresh fish? It is immense, but what is the cost of not doing so? The answer is a failed project. A malnourished laborer cannot lift a 2-ton block of limestone. A weak workforce cannot haul that block up a steep ramp day after day. A discontented population, surviving on scraps, would not have remained motivated for the decades required to complete the pyramid. The investment in quality food was the single most important investment in the project's success, far more critical than the gold that might line the burial chamber. This logic extends to the very social structure of the workforce. Enslaved populations are, by their nature, unstable. They require a massive investment in security to prevent rebellion and escape. They have no loyalty to their task and every reason to perform poorly or sabotage the work. The Giza operation, by contrast, shows all the signs of a stable, motivated, and integrated community. The proud names of the work crews, the Friends of Khufu, etched into the very stones of the king's tomb, are not the marks of a broken spirit. They are the marks of pride and corporate identity. This was a workforce that saw itself as participating in a national, even a sacred, endeavor. Providing them with a diet fit for the elite was a powerful way to cement that social contract. It was a continuous, tangible demonstration that their Herculean effort was recognized, valued, and rewarded by the state and the gods themselves. The daily meal was a ritual that reinforced their place in the cosmic order, transforming exhausting labor into a form of service that was compensated with the very best the kingdom had to offer. Ultimately, the proof is in the pyramid itself. The precision of its construction, the sheer logistical miracle of its completion, stands as the ultimate testament to the effectiveness of this system. You simply cannot achieve this level of perfection with a workforce that is starving, resentful, and coerced. The pyramids were built by the strength of well-fed, well-organized, and willing participants. The myth of the slave is not just inaccurate, it is an insult to the ingenuity of the Egyptian state and to the legacy of the skilled laborers who dedicated their lives to this awe-inspiring project. When we look at the Great Pyramid, we should no longer see a monument built on the backs of slaves, but a monument built by the hands of well-compensated and highly valued Egyptian citizens, whose strength was forged in the state-run kitchens and breweries that made the impossible possible. As the first light of dawn crept across the desert, the workers' village at Giza would stir to life, not with the blare of a horn, but with the familiar, comforting aromas of the morning meal. Before the sun's heat became oppressive, A laborer would rise from his simple bed in the communal barracks and join his crew, the Friends of Khufu, for the essential fuel that would launch their day. His breakfast was not a complex affair, but it was powerfully effective. He would receive his daily ration of bread, several of those dense, conical loaves made from coarse emmer wheat, and a ceramic jug filled with the thick, nutritious beer that was the lifeblood of the workforce. This morning combination was the ancient equivalent of a power bar and an energy drink. The bread provided a slow-burning source of complex carbohydrates, while the beer delivered a quick caloric boost, essential hydration, and a dose of B vitamins from the yeast. He would tear off a piece of the gritty bread, using it to scoop up a mouthful of the beer's porridge-like sediment, or simply take a long drink from the jug. This wasn't a leisurely sit-down meal. It was a functional start, consumed quickly while standing, a ritual that prepared their bodies for the immense physical exertion to come. The carbohydrates and sugars would flood their systems, providing the immediate energy needed for the first grueling hours of hauling stones and navigating the construction ramps. By the time the sun reached its zenith, blazing down on the limestone plateau, the workers would have already expended a tremendous amount of energy. The morning's fuel would be depleted, and the call for a midday break would be a welcome relief. They would retreat to whatever shade they could find, perhaps under a temporary awning or in the lee of the growing pyramid itself. Here, the second act of their daily sustenance would unfold. They would pull out more of their bread ration, along with another portion of beer to quench their powerful thirst. But the midday meal often included an extra dimension of flavor and nutrition. From a small cloth pouch or a ceramic bowl, a worker might produce a handful of pungent onions or a few radishes, their crisp, sharp taste a refreshing contrast to the monotony of the bread. These vegetables were more than just flavor. They were a source of vital micronutrients and vitamin C, which would help their bodies manage the oxidative stress of such intense labor. For many, this break might also include a portion of fish. Given the logistical challenges of providing fresh meat to thousands of people at a remote worksite, preserved fish was a practical and ubiquitous protein source. A worker could easily carry a piece of sun-dried Nile perch or a salted catfish fillet. He would gnaw on the tough, salty fish directly, or perhaps crumble it into his beer or over his bread, rehydrating it with the liquid. This provided a crucial infusion of protein and healthy fats right at the moment their muscles needed it most, helping to repair the microscopic damage already incurred during the morning's labor and preparing them for the afternoon ahead. This break was as much a social event as a nutritional one. Crews would eat together, sharing food, talking, and laughing, strengthening the bonds of camaraderie that were essential for coordinating their dangerous and precise work. The true culinary event of the day, however, was the evening meal. As the sun dipped below the western desert and the air began to cool, the workers would return to their village, their bodies aching and exhausted. The atmosphere would shift from one of frantic industry to one of communal recovery. The air would be thick with the unmistakable, mouth-watering scent of stews simmering in large ceramic pots over open fires. This was the main meal, the time when the most substantial and rewarding rations were consumed. Here, the prized ingredients came together in a symphony of nourishment. A typical evening dish would likely be a hearty stew, a one-pot wonder that maximized flavor and nutrition. Into these pots went chunks of prime beef or mutton, their rich fats rendering down into the broth. Lentils or fava beans would be added, swelling as they cooked, contributing plant-based protein and fiber to complement the animal protein. The base of the stew would be built on a foundation of chopped onions and garlic, sizzled in rendered sheep or cattle fat, their aromatic sweetness permeating the entire mixture. For additional flavor and substance, pieces of dried fish might be included, and the whole concoction would be seasoned with whatever wild herbs were available. This stew was not just food, it was medicine for tired bodies. The combination of high-quality protein from the meat and fish was essential for muscle repair and recovery overnight. The complex carbohydrates from any bread used to sop up the gravy, along with the lentils, would replenish glycogen stores in their muscles, ensuring they woke up with energy the next day. The fats from the meat and the cooking oil were crucial for absorbing fat-soluble vitamins and for providing the dense, long-lasting calories needed to sustain their massive daily energy expenditure. But the importance of this meal extended far beyond its biochemical components. Workers would gather around these stew pots in their designated crew areas, sitting together on mats, sharing the food from common bowls. This was a time for storytelling, for discussing the day's challenges, for complaining about a foreman, or for boasting about a perfectly placed block. It was a ritual that reinforced their identity as a team, as a crew, transforming a group of individuals into a cohesive unit. The act of sharing a nourishing, well-cooked meal after an exhausting day built trust and solidarity. It was a powerful psychological reward, a moment of comfort and community that made the unbearable seem manageable. As they ate their fill, their bodies beginning the slow process of recovery, they were not just consuming calories, they were participating in a social contract, one that promised that for their immense labor, they would be fed, they would be valued, and they would be part of something eternal. But with all this talk of thick, nutritious beer, you might be wondering, what about plain water? In the blistering heat of the Egyptian desert, where temperatures could soar to unbearable levels, hydration wasn't just a matter of comfort, it was a matter of life and death. A laborer engaged in such intense physical exertion could lose several gallons of water through sweat in a single day. Dehydration would have led to heat stroke, muscle cramps, and complete collapse, halting work and endangering lives. So where did they get the millions of gallons of clean water needed to keep this human machine running? The answer, as is so much in ancient Egypt, starts with the Nile. The river was the ultimate source, but hauling water up to the plateau for thousands of men would have been its own monumental task. To solve this, the ancient engineers did what they did best: they built. Archaeological surveys around Giza have revealed a sophisticated system of canals and basins that channeled Nile water from a nearby harbor right to the edge of the plateau. Furthermore, they dug deep wells directly into the limestone bedrock, tapping into the high water table that sits just below the desert surface. These wells provided a reliable, on-site source of fresh water, a crucial piece of infrastructure that made the entire city of workers possible. Yet, even with this access to wells and canals, there was a hidden danger that the Egyptians understood all too well: waterborne pathogens. The Nile, while life-giving, was also a soup of bacteria and parasites. Stagnant water in canals or even a contaminated well could spread dysentery, cholera, and other devastating illnesses that would have ripped through the densely populated workers' village, decimating the workforce and bringing construction to a standstill. This is the central, brilliant reason why beer was the beverage of choice. The process of brewing beer involved boiling the water as part of the mashing process, effectively sterilizing it and killing off the dangerous microbes. The subsequent fermentation, where yeast converted sugars into alcohol, created an even more hostile environment for pathogens thanks to the resulting low pH and the presence of alcohol. While their beer had a very low alcohol content, probably around 3% or less, similar to a modern light beer, it was just enough to make it microbiologically safe. So, when a worker drank his daily ration of beer, he wasn't just getting calories and nutrients, he was consuming a reliably safe and sterile hydrating fluid. It was the ancient world's most effective form of water purification. This makes beer a fascinating dual-purpose resource. It wasn't merely a safe alternative to water, it was a nutritional supplement in liquid form. Think of it as a fortified, energy-packed sports drink. While a modern laborer might drink water and then eat a meal to get calories, the pyramid builder could accomplish both simultaneously. The thick, unfiltered beer was rich in carbohydrates, vitamins from the yeast, and even some amino acids from the grain. This constant, slow trickle of liquid calories provided a steady energy stream that helped maintain blood sugar levels throughout the day, preventing the energy dips that could occur between solid meals. This was far more efficient than relying on water alone, which provides their energy. In the context of their caloric needs, which we've established were enormous, beer was an incredibly efficient delivery system. It allowed a worker to ingest a significant portion of his daily energy requirement without feeling overly full or needing to stop for a long, solid meal. He could take a swig from his jug while maneuvering a sled, hydrating, and refueling in a single, seamless action. The choice between water and beer, therefore, wasn't really a choice at all from a practical standpoint. Water was essential for cooking, for cleaning, and for mixing mortar, but for direct human consumption in large quantities, beer was simply the smarter, safer, and more nutritious option. This doesn't mean workers never drank plain water, they almost certainly did, especially from the trusted well sources. But for their primary, guaranteed daily hydration ration, the state provided beer. This was a profound public health strategy, a logistical masterstroke that ensured the workforce remained healthy, hydrated, and energized. The bustling breweries of the workers' village were, in effect, the largest and most important water treatment plants in the ancient world, producing a life-sustaining elixir that kept the heart of the pyramid project beating strong under the relentless desert sun. Given their remarkably varied and high-quality diet, it's natural to wonder if the pyramid builders ever tasted anything truly exotic flavors from beyond the familiar borders of Egypt, brought in by the long-reaching trade networks of the state. While the overwhelming bulk of their food was locally sourced, a product of the Nile Valley's incredible fertility, there is compelling evidence that the Egyptian state's economic tentacles stretched far and wide, and some of those foreign goods might have occasionally trickled down to the plateau as rare and powerful incentives. To understand this possibility, we first need to appreciate the sheer scale and sophistication of Old Kingdom trade. The pharaoh's administration wasn't just building pyramids, it was running a complex international enterprise, dispatching vast trading expeditions by land and sea to acquire goods that Egypt itself could not produce. To the south, down the Nile, lay the rich and mysterious land of Nubia, a source of gold, ebony, ivory, and crucially for our story, exotic animals and potentially aromatic spices. To the northeast, across the Sinai Desert, were the bustling ports and kingdoms of the Levant, modern-day Lebanon, and Israel, which supplied the Egyptians with a commodity they prized almost as highly as gold itself, the majestic cedar tree. These enormous cedar logs, shipped by sea from the forests of Byblos, were absolutely essential for the pyramid project. Their strength and length made them ideal for the massive sleds used to drag stone blocks, for the levers used to position them, and for the construction of the barges that transported granite all the way from Aswan. But the trade caravans returning from the Levant didn't just carry timber. In the holds of their ships and the packs of their donkeys were other precious goods, including highly valued plant-based oils. Olive oil, for instance, was not yet a staple in Old Kingdom Egypt, but it was beginning to be imported as a luxury item. Similarly, oils extracted from conifers like the cedar itself, or from other Levantine plants, were coveted for their distinctive scents and properties. These oils were thicker, more fragrant, and often considered more prestigious than the common animal tallow and local linseed oil used in everyday cooking. So, could a worker seasoning his lentil stew have ever tasted a drop of this imported olive oil? It's highly unlikely that such expensive commodities were part of the standard ration. These goods were tightly controlled by the state and the temple, reserved for religious rituals, for anointing the elite, and for use in the royal court. However, the system of motivation on the pyramid project was clearly advanced, using prime cuts of meat as both regular sustenance and special rewards. It is within this framework of calculated incentives that we can imagine the occasional spectacular bonus. Picture a work crew, the drunkards of Menkaure, achieving a monumental milestone. Perhaps they successfully moved and set the capstone of a subsidiary pyramid, or they finished a difficult section of the internal passageway weeks ahead of schedule. To mark such an achievement, the state administrators might have authorized a feast beyond all ordinary measure. Alongside the expected roasted haunches of beef and jugs of beer, the cooks might have prepared a dish using a small, precious quantity of imported oil. A salad of lettuce and radishes, for example, dressed not with common animal fat, but with a drizzle of fragrant oil from the Levant, would have been a transformative culinary experience. The unique, fruity flavor would have been unlike anything they had ever tasted, a direct sensory connection to the distant, mythical lands they only heard about in stories. From the south, from Nubia and the land of Punt even further beyond, came other potential luxuries. While evidence for spices in the Old Kingdom is more subtle than for oils, we know that the Egyptians valued aromatic resins like myrrh and frankincense for religious ceremonies. It is not a great leap to consider that other, more culinary aromatic barks, seeds, or leaves could have been among the traded goods. A small amount of a pungent spice, used to season a vast communal stew for a celebratory feast, would have been a powerful symbol of the pharaoh's reach and gratitude. The psychological impact of such an event cannot be overstated. For a laborer whose world was defined by the dust of the quarry, the weight of stone, and the familiar flavors of the Nile, to taste a flavor that traveled thousands of miles, procured by the pharaoh's own expeditions, would have been profoundly motivating. It was a tangible demonstration that their work was connected to a grand, global enterprise. This wasn't just about building a tomb, it was about affirming Egypt's power and wealth among the nations, and they, the builders, were being given a direct, delicious taste of that glory. This possibility, however slim, completes our picture of the pyramid builder's diet, elevating it from a brilliantly efficient fuel system to a potential tool for elite social engineering. Their daily sustenance was already superior, but the strategic, rare inclusion of an imported luxury would have served as the ultimate non-monetary bonus. It reinforced hierarchy. They were being rewarded by a power that had access to things they did not, while simultaneously fostering an incredible sense of shared accomplishment and privilege. It transformed a meal into a medal, a feast into a ceremony of state recognition. So while their plates were overwhelmingly filled with the magnificent bounty of Egypt itself, the ghost of a possibility remains that on the most exceptional of days, the air in the workers' village might have carried not just the scent of roasting beef and beer, but the faint, thrilling aroma of distant forests and foreign shores. This culture of calculated reward reached its zenith in the grand communal feasts that periodically transformed the workers' village from a hub of industry into a site of celebration. The most dramatic evidence for these events comes, once again, from the ancient trash heaps, but this time with a telling twist. Archaeologists have identified specific deposits containing incredibly concentrated piles of animal bones, but with a crucial difference from the everyday waste. These particular bones are overwhelmingly from young, prime-aged cattle, animals in the peak of their health, slaughtered at the perfect moment for their meat to be at its most tender and flavorful. The sheer volume in these specific dumps is staggering, representing the simultaneous butchering of dozens, perhaps even hundreds, of these valuable animals. This isn't the pattern of routine, daily ration distribution. This is the unmistakable archaeological signature of a massive, planned feast, a deliberate and spectacular consumption of the state's most prized protein resources. The location of these feasting deposits is equally revealing. They aren't scattered randomly across the settlement, but are often found in association with open, plaza-like areas or near specific buildings that might have served as communal gathering halls. This suggests these were not private affairs, but organized, large-scale events designed to include huge segments of the workforce at once. Imagine the scene as a major milestone on the pyramid was achieved, perhaps the completion of a crucial course of stones or the alignment of a grand gallery. The state would authorize a massive celebration. The air, normally scented with dust and baking bread, would be thick with the smoky, irresistible aroma of roasting beef. Dozens of fire pits would be roaring, each supporting spits laden with entire haunches or sides of prime beef, a sight and smell that would have been utterly intoxicating for the laborers. The social and psychological impact of these feasts cannot be overstated. In a society where hierarchy was ever present, these events created a powerful, temporary equality. For one evening, the distinction between a skilled stone dresser and a hauling crew laborer would blur as they sat together, sharing in the same magnificent bounty. This communal participation in such a luxury reinforced a profound sense of shared identity and common purpose. It visually and viscerally demonstrated that every role, from the most technically skilled to the most physically demanding, was integral to the project's success. The feast was a tangible expression of collective achievement, a ritual that wove the thousands of individual workers into a single, cohesive social fabric, strengthening the bonds of camaraderie that were essential for the dangerous and coordinated work they performed. Beyond fostering unity, these grand feasts functioned as a brilliant motivational engine. The promise of such a spectacular reward, publicly announced and eagerly anticipated, would have driven crews to push their limits, to solve logistical problems, and to strive for efficiency. The feast was not just a reward for past labor, it was an investment in future productivity. It created a cycle of effort and celebration that helped sustain morale over the decades-long timeline of the construction. The psychological lift provided by such an event, a break from the grueling routine, a full belly of the finest food, and the recognition from their superiors would have re-energized the workforce for the months of hard labor to come. This practice reveals a sophisticated understanding of human psychology by the ancient administrators. They knew that the most complex engineering project in the world relied not just on ropes and ramps, but on the human spirit, and they wisely invested in nourishing that spirit with the most powerful tool at their disposal, a magnificent communal feast that made every worker feel like a valued and essential partner in building eternity. The story of the pyramid builder's diet ultimately transcends mere nutrition, revealing the true engine behind these ancient wonders, a logistical system of breathtaking sophistication. While we marvel at the stone blocks, the real monument was the invisible, meticulously planned network that transformed grain into bread, barley into beer, and cattle into stew for thousands day after day for generations. This food supply chain was an achievement in statecraft and management, every bit as impressive as the architectural feat it supported. It demonstrates a level of central planning and foresight that rivals modern large-scale operations, proving that the ancient Egyptians were masters of what we would now call human resource management and supply chain logistics. The pyramids stand not just as tombs of stone, but as testaments to the power of a well-fed, strategically organized workforce. Consider the sheer scale of the operation. To keep a workforce of thousands consistently strong and motivated required a constant, reliable flow of provisions that had to be calculated years in advance. This wasn't a reactive system. It was a proactive, state-run enterprise that functioned with the precision of a military campaign. The administrators in the royal court weren't just dreaming of grand monuments. They were managing a national economy geared toward a single, unifying goal. They had to calculate the annual yield of emmer wheat and barley from farms across the Nile Valley, collect a portion as tax, transport it via river barges to central granaries, and then allocate it to the Giza bakeries and breweries. They organized cattle ranches and fishing expeditions, established preservation facilities for fish and meat, and created a distribution system that delivered these rations as formal wages. This required scribes to keep meticulous records, overseers to manage the workflows, and engineers to maintain the canals and wells that supplied the water. The entire kingdom became a single, integrated machine dedicated to fueling the construction site, with every loaf of bread and every jug of beer representing a successful link in that vast, ancient supply chain. This logistical triumph also reveals a surprisingly modern understanding of labor value and social contract. The choice to provide high-quality food prime cuts of meat, abundant fish, and nutritious staples was a deliberate investment in human capital. The state recognized that a malnourished, coerced labor force would be inefficient, prone to error, and unlikely to sustain the decades of effort required. Instead, by offering a diet that was not only sufficient but desirable and health-promoting, they fostered a sense of value and loyalty. Receiving a daily wage of hearty food created a tangible, immediate reward for backbreaking work. It built trust between the labor force and the administration, reinforcing the idea that this was a form of honored national service, not punitive slavery. This system transformed the relationship from one of potential exploitation into a mutually beneficial agreement. The state provided sustenance and purpose, the workers provided the muscle and skill. This social stability was the bedrock upon which the pyramids were built, proving that the most complex engineering projects rely as much on human morale as they do on physics and mathematics. Ultimately, the legacy of the pyramid builder's diet forces us to completely redefine our image of ancient societies. It shows us a civilization capable of long-term strategic thinking, with a bureaucratic apparatus sophisticated enough to manage resources on a continental scale. They weren't primitive slave drivers. They were pioneering administrators who understood that to achieve the impossible, you must first care for the people who will accomplish it. Their success teaches a timeless lesson. Great monuments are not built by the whims of tyrants, but by the collective strength of a well-organized and well-supported community. The true wonder of the pyramids, therefore, isn't just that they were built, but how they were built through a system of such profound foresight and human-centered planning that its principles still resonate with us today, a lasting legacy written not in stone, but in the very bread and beer that fueled a civilization's greatest ambition. So, after this deep dive into the kitchens and trash heaps of ancient Giza, what is the final, undeniable verdict on the diet of the pyramid builders? It's a story that completely rewrites the narrative. These workers were not the half-starved slaves of popular legend. They were the beneficiaries of a state-sponsored nutrition program of incredible scale and sophistication. Their daily life was powered by a surprisingly diverse and robust menu. The coarse, hearty bread baked in thousands of clay pots, the thick, nutrient-packed beer that served as both hydration and calories, the generous rations of prime beef and mutton, the abundant fish hauled from the Nile and preserved for year-round consumption, and the fresh vegetables and sweet fruits that rounded out meals with essential vitamins and flavors. This wasn't a diet of mere subsistence. It was a diet of performance, carefully engineered to sustain immense physical effort over decades. The evidence from archaeology, from the bones of the workers themselves, and from the sheer logistics of the operation all point to one conclusion. The Egyptian state invested heavily in the well-being of its workforce, understanding that a well-fed laborer was a strong, productive, and loyal one. This revelation forces us to see the pyramid builders in a completely new light. They were not a coerced, anonymous mass, but a highly organized, rotating workforce of skilled Egyptian villagers, compensated for their labor with a wage of high-quality food. The state's provisioning system was a brilliant piece of ancient economics, transforming agricultural surplus into national power. The bread and beer they consumed were literal currency, the fuel that powered an economic engine dedicated to a single, unifying goal. By freeing these workers from the need to grow their own food, the state created the world's first large-scale, specialized construction crews, enabling the full-time, year-round effort that such a monumental project demanded. The administrative genius behind this food supply chain, the granaries, the bakeries, the breweries, the butchery operations, is an achievement that rivals the architectural marvel of the pyramids themselves. It reveals a civilization capable of long-term planning and complex logistical management on a truly breathtaking scale. Ultimately, this changes everything about how we view these ancient wonders. The enduring image of the pyramid as a monument built on the crack of a whip and the desperation of slaves is not just inaccurate, it is an injustice to the memory of the people who built them. The truth is far more compelling and human. The Great Pyramid of Giza does not stand on the backs of slaves. It stands on the full stomachs of respected and well-fed Egyptian workers. It stands as a testament to their strength, their skill, and their shared commitment to a national project. It stands as proof that the greatest achievements in human history are not accomplished through oppression, but through organization, investment, and a profound understanding that to build for eternity, you must first care for the people who do the building. The next time you see a picture of those majestic structures, remember the bustling workers' village, the smell of baking bread and roasting meat, and the community of individuals who, fueled by a surprisingly good meal, achieved the impossible. What do you think about this completely different picture of life on the Giza Plateau? Were you surprised by just how well these ancient laborers ate? Let us know your thoughts and reactions in the comments below. We'd love to keep this fascinating conversation going.